Every day, your City of Tempe staff goes above and beyond to make sure our community gets the best possible services and the most for our tax dollars. But how good is good? How do you measure it? And how do we know what we really need to make progress on some of our most pressing issues? To guide us, we developed a series of goals designed to help us improve our community based on our Tempe City Council's 5 strategic priorities. Reaching for excellence, we are comparing ourselves against the rest of the nation as well as ourselves. Some of our goals will help save lives. Some of them will help us save money. All of them will help us make Tempe a better place. Send us your ideas and suggestions to Tempe Accelerates at tempe.gov and visit us at tempe.gov/Tempe Accelerates.
Hi, I'm Ken Jones, the Deputy City Manager, and our video lead-in did a great job of introducing what we're here today for, but I'm going to elaborate on that just a bit. So our Strategic Management and Diversity Office created this Tempe Accelerates project so that people could come up from our employee base and tell you what they're working on to help our performance in the city. We have a lot of council identified priorities, and the departments looked at those priorities. Today's is based on safe and secure communities, and they said, what measures can we put into place to determine whether or not this is a safe and secure community? So we have several of those, and you're going to hear from 2 of them today. And I think we start out with fire, and they're going to talk about, what are you going to talk about, Hans? You're going to talk about fire inspections in high occupancy facilities and how that leads to a safe and secure community. So Hans, introduce yourself and give us your presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, appreciate that. I'm Hans Silberschlag. I'm one of the assistant chiefs for Tempe Fire Medical Rescue Department. I'm also the appointed fire marshal, and so this falls under my realm of responsibility. So real quick here, the council priority that we're addressing today is the safe and secure communities. And specifically, it's performance measure 1.14, which we have the goal to try to get into all of our high-risk occupancies annually for an inspection. I'll go into that just briefly here. But you have to ask kind of why does this even matter? So we've got 2 standards that we follow. One of them is from the National Fire Protection Association. The other one is from our accrediting body. And so the Commission on Fire Accreditation, both of them have very similar, matter of fact, exact standards. And those standards are that high-risk occupancies should be inspected annually, moderate-risk occupancies should be inspected biannually, and then low-risk occupancies between 3 and 5 years. So what a high-risk occupancy has is it has a higher probability for an emergency. And that's for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's because of the materials or the manufacturing that they do in those. And other ones are for the occupants, because there's a greater likelihood that an occupant could become entrapped or in danger, and maybe because of the size or the complexity of the actual facility that they become trapped in that. So in 2016-17, the fiscal year, we had 114 fires that were investigated. And out of those, there were 47 of them that were either in high, moderate, or low risk occupancies. How it broke down is we had 35 of them, or about 30% or so, in high risk occupancies. 3 of them were in moderates, and 9 were in lows. So that really does match up with the national standards, and that is the fact that there's a greater risk of a high risk occupancy fire. And then there were actually no deaths in that same fiscal time. The next one was the most recent fiscal year that we completed in 2017-18. We had 90 fires that were investigated. 29 of them were actually in those 3 different types of occupancies. 22 were in high-risk occupancies, 6 were in moderates, and 1 was in a low-risk occupancy. So we had 3 components that we had to accomplish to meet this performance measure. First of all, we had to identify the high-risk occupancies, see where they were in the city. We needed to inspect them. Then we needed to follow up, re-inspect, and close out the violations. So the first thing we did was we tried to identify them. So we evaluated the data we had. The data is in a database that we call Firehouse. It's a management tool that we've been using since the late 90s. We had to verify those by actually going out and seeing if those buildings still existed, because the data goes all the way back to the 90s. And then we had to update the risk assessment based off of a guideline that we used, and then we're going to plot those within our subzones and our mapping priorities that we have. So the first thing after we did that, we started going out and inspecting them. And so we inspected all for the fire and life safety type of violations. We tried to cite those violations and then work with the occupants and give them some education on what needed to be corrected. And so we wanted to get voluntary compliance on all the code violations that were found. And then we try to reestablish a reinspection date or time and try to do a follow-up. And then the third thing is when we'd follow up, reinspect, we try to close out the violations. And so we try to provide that voluntary guidance. We establish these timelines of compliance, and they kind of ebb and flow just a little bit. We did some additional follow-up and tried to do some reinspection when required, and then we did close the violations and then noted that in the database. So our target was 100% to get in our high-risk occupancies. It really involves 7 different occupancy types within the city. So what we did was we looked at the 2040 plan, we looked at our project density. If you can see what's kind of circled right there, it's going to be things that are kind of higher risk in nature. So we started looking at that, we compared that to our database, and then we also compared it in the 2040 plan. We looked at the projected plan use for when it comes to land usage. And we found that in the same sense, we could see where a lot of the businesses, high density things were going to be going in. So we plotted that up against our map pages and our subzones, which we use for dispatch purposes. And then we tried to create our target, figure out what our target was. And what we do is we looked at how kind of an archer would shoot an arrow at a target. And so what we decided is that we're going to try to aim higher just to hit the target as opposed to just aim at the target and then perhaps miss it. So we established weekly goals. We have an overarching goal of trying to get into them annually, 100%, and then we broke it down into weekly goals. So we also broke down the city into 3 different boundaries. We broke it down into north, central, and south. North is basically from Broadway to the Scottsdale-Tempe border. Between Broadway and Baseline is the central, and then Baseline south to the Chandler border is the south region. And we found that in that red circular area, there's about 48% of our high-risk occupancies were in that outlined area. So they're pretty identifiable, I'd say. In July of 2017, we found in just our north section alone, we had 414 high-risk occupancy inspections to complete. In the central area, we had 257. In the south, we had 177 for a total of 848. 1 year later, we found that in reality, after changes in building usage as well as changes in land usage, we found that we really had 540 in the north, 313, then 253, and then for a total of 1,106. So it's about a 30% increase. So why I say it ebbs and flows is because when we go out and do an inspection, we may go to a building that was deemed a moderate in the past, and we go into it and they've changed occupant ownership, they've changed complete processes, and now they're considered a high risk. On the flip side, we may have a building that was much smaller in nature, it was taken down and the land was repurposed, and maybe it's a higher density and a larger structure. So that's why it kind of ebbs and flows. One thing that we have found is just been a steady uphill tick. It has not gone down at all for our high-risk occupancies. So in October of 2016 was a starting point for us. We have a community risk assessment guideline that we follow. The one that we redeveloped in 2016 was updated to meet our NFPA standards and our accrediting body standards. Prior to that, our community risk assessment was established in 1997, and we utilized it since 1997 because the standard didn't change much. But there's a significant change the last go around. So in 2016, October is when we started with a brand new occupancy or a community risk assessment. So we had 401 high-risk occupancies. 1 year later, we found it to be 782. 6 months after that, it became 896. And then the most recent data we have is 1,106. So it goes to show you how things are changing dramatically, and occupancy usage is changing also. So if you just look at these two and just compare the gap between those two, it's about 175% increase. Excuse me. So we do a lot of inspections, not just high-risk inspections. We cover a lot of new construction inspections, re-inspections, a variety of things. And so you'll see in fiscal year 2016-17, we did over 5,200 fire inspections or life safety inspections of some sort. In the next fiscal year, it went up to 8,200, a little bit more, so it's an increase of 56%. So one of the things we did was we go very low tech. Excuse me, I know it seems really strange. We actually have a dry erase board. We call it the scoreboard. And then there's a Monday meeting. And our fire inspectors, along with our lead inspector, they meet up every Monday and they go over the board. And so they look at what has been done over the last week. They go over some things that may have happened through fire investigations, inspections. And so they have a meeting on their own, and they have some discussions, and we talk about where we are and those things. We do actually put this onto an electronic thing because you got to put it in some sort of database because people freak out about the dry erase board that someone might come and erase it. But we actually put it in and we track it according to a weekly basis. So this is not my EKG. It's actually a weekly snapshot of all of our high risk and moderate risk inspections. So the top little blue line, that is actually our high risk inspection baseline. And what we did was, you see it kind of jumped up a little bit by 5. What we did is we hired 3 inspectors because of vacancies that were created through attrition, and we were able to bump up then the baseline a little bit higher and re-establish that target or that goal so we at least reach it. So in high-risk inspections, we did complete 559 in fiscal year 2015-16. So we're kind of going back in time, but this is under the old community risk assessment that was done in 1997. So we did about 115 of those inspections. We completed about 20% is what we did back then. In 16-17, we were under the new risk assessment guideline. We were able to accomplish 782 high-risk occupancy inspections. Or high-risk occupancies, we got in and did 572 inspections, so that's about 73.1%. And then the most recent data that we have, and like I said, we change it and we're looking at it weekly and daily, is we have 969 high-risk occupancies in that last fiscal year, the one we just completed. We were able to actually get into, so we actually looped ourselves. We got into over 1,000 of them, so we completed 108% of our high-risk occupancies, but they keep showing up, so I don't get too terribly excited about that just yet. So here's another, I think, a very interesting thing. The violations that were corrected, we had 2,600, a little bit more than 2,600 in fiscal year 16-17 that were corrected. The next fiscal year, we corrected 4,300, so that's an increase of 65%. So we accomplished our goal. If you can't tell what that trophy is a curling trophy. So what we did was we sat down, we developed a strategy. That was the first thing we did. We did this as a group. It wasn't just done in a vacuum. We evaluated the data, and we try to make some plans according to what we were finding. We communicated weekly, and that's where that Monday morning weekly meeting kind of came through. And then we worked as a team. That was the key thing. So I'm only representing the work group that actually does this, and they did a great job. Occasionally, we did slip up a little bit. We missed our target every so often. And then when we did hit it, we celebrated, and we kind of kept moving on. We used that momentum to keep the motivation going. So we're trying to think of what can we do in the future? What are some of the strategies? One of the things we want to do is create a self-reinspection program. What that means is if there's a very simple violation that could be corrected, such as fire extinguishers that might need to be serviced or something like that, what we would do is we'd have the occupant just take care of that, and it would save us from going back and using time to go back just to verify that their fire extinguishers have been completed. So we're trying to reduce the number of re-inspections is what we're trying to do. The other thing we're going to do is this October, we're going to readjust the boundary lines a little bit. So we're going to actually move them up slightly. We're going to have the northern boundary start at about University just because of what we're starting to see in our data. We're going to move the central one up a little bit from from baseline to southern, and then it looks like the lower third is extremely large, but based off of the data we have, we're doing okay with that right now. So we're also going to look at our community risk assessment. We're required to look at it annually and change it according to our community needs, but then every 5 years we do have to go through and make sure that it is up to whatever standard we need and it meets the current standards. So that's going to occur in 2021. So we're thinking a little bit further out for that also. We're also going to continue to track trends. So one of the things we do in the Monday morning meetings is by tracking the trends, we can maybe meet with or send out information concerning fires or life safety things. And what we'd like to do that is provide it to the owners, and then the owners get educational material. They can understand those types of things. It will hopefully decrease the likelihood of a fire, which then comes back and it ties back into our council priority. So there's this loop that takes place. If we track the trends, we identify them, we get the educational material out to them. And then another efficiency thing we're looking at is we're looking at a low-risk self-inspection program. So this means if you have a commercial occupancy, it's a low-risk type of occupancy. We're supposed to get into those every 3 to 5 years. There are a large number of those. I'll show you in here just a moment. But if we could get the owner or occupant and give them a little bit of training and they could do some of those things, if you have a very small barber shop or something like that, you may be able to fit into that and do a self-inspection. within a 3 to 5 year span, we would like to try to get out there just to verify that the inspection was being done correctly. So talking about that low-risk self-inspection, right now in our database, we have 1,500 what we consider low risk. But when we evaluate them even further, that number jumps up a little bit higher to what we'd consider about 5,400 to be self-inspection. So we think that they could fall within that category. So that's about 7,000 inspections we still have to do because we are obligated to get into these low-risk occupancies every 3 to 5 years. So one of the challenges we're also going to have is the ASU Stadium District. This little area here that's kind of highlighted is going to be developed, and we're going to be an integral part in it. And so that's going to increase the number of inspections we're going to be doing also. The number of assets just continually change, and they change ever so slightly, but they always seem to be going in the upward trend for the most part. And then our inspector corps our fire inspectors are going to be also adding all the Tempe assets to our inspection list. So we've already identified 66 highs that we're going to be adding, 25 moderates and 24 lows. So we're going to get out to city buildings. We'll do the same thing also. And then one of the unknowns, though, is the state fire marshal. We are one of the jurisdictions that does not get into schools. The state fire marshal's office has jurisdiction over the elementary and high schools, middle schools also. Arizona State University has their own fire marshal group that is appointed by the state fire marshal. We just don't know at some point. They've asked us a number of times to take over their elementary schools and their high schools and their middle schools. We just don't know when they're going to finally say, you need to take it over. So that's happened in other jurisdictions already. And then one of the other challenges, we're adopting a new fire code. We're going to have some updated standards. That means we're going to have some additional training for our members, make sure they can consistently apply the code and interpret it correctly, make sure there's some quality assurance on that stuff. And then we're going to have a grace period for our businesses to be able to, if there's a financial burden associated with that, we need to be able to work with them on those types of things. So at that point, Aaron did not give me you need to end it quickly. Okay, sure.
So Hans did a great job of describing for you why this performance measure is important to achieve our safe and secure communities. He also told you how they came about, the goal that they have, which is a nationally established once per year inspection.
Yeah.
And then he also described for you some of the strategies that they have for trying to achieve that goal, shifting of resources, and then he subliminally showed you a picture of the New York skyline in a weak attempt asking for more resources.
No, I didn't.
So this is your opportunity to ask questions of Hans about how he might achieve his goal and give him some suggestions. So this is an opportunity, and those of you who are here, invite members of the community you know who are interested in these topics, because we want to hear from the community as well. But so Hans, you're back on the hot seat here. Any questions or suggestions you have, this is the time.
You may be breaking a sweat. I didn't do that. If I did, it was subliminally.
Okay. I take it back.
Before I actually get any questions, we do have two of our inspectors right back here right now. I just have to make sure that you understand we have a group of 8 of them. They do a tremendous job. David Fabak is our lead fire inspector, and then John Dowrick is one of our other fire inspectors. These guys and gals we have, they are doing this, and they bought into it, and they've taken ownership into this, and that's what's making this happen. It's nothing, it's probably very little with what I'm doing. I'm just trying to stay out of the way, to really be honest with you. We just think that we can obtain this goal, and so they've been able to do it. So all the accolades really need to go to you guys, so I appreciate you guys doing that, and I appreciate you coming too.
So questions and comments? Thanks, guys. Questions and comments related to this performance measure? Don't be shy. And we're taping this, so we'll run a microphone to you if you have a question.
I think I might have missed it. Is this for both residential and commercial, the numbers that you were giving, or is it just strictly like high-rise commercial?
Residential fall into high-risk occupancies. So hotels would fall into high-risk occupancies, large apartment complexes. So there's divisions of residential. We don't go into private homes. I don't even know how many private homes we would have. Oh my gosh. But so yeah, I'm sorry I didn't clarify that one. Okay.
I'll throw one at you.
Absolutely.
You did a great job of describing some of the strategies you have. Do you have a target date in mind where you think you would move from the current 50% to 100%?
Well, we actually, when we ran that number was 50%. We've actually been able to accomplish 100%. So we are actually there now. Now what we'd like to do is is get through all of our moderates next, but this particular goal wasn't about our moderates and our lows. So we still have other goals to obtain. We only focused on just the high-risk occupancies for this particular goal, but we continue to work on all the other ones. There's other ones that are still in play.
Great. Other questions or suggestions?
Chad. Oh, sorry, Waydale. Sorry.
How do you anticipate maintaining this level of performance in addition to the medium and low risk inspections?
We're hoping, I don't know if hoping is the right word. What we'd like to do is if we can implement the self-reinspection, if we can get owners and occupants to take care of some of the things that are fairly easy to do, kind of the low-hanging fruit when it comes to violations, that would save us some additional time to then put it into other things also. We'd also love to get the lowest risk occupancies inspected and get the public to engage in doing inspections, because it'd make their awareness level come up, and then what we'd be able to do is free up the time of our inspectors and investigators. They also have to continually go through training. So we have this juggling act going on. We have a lot of inspections we're trying to accomplish. They investigate fires, and then they have to maintain certification. So it's quite a juggling act, and I'm not asking for personnel. What we're just saying is we're going to do everything we can to save time and evaluate that aspect first, and then what we'll do is we'll move on to looking what would we need next.
While we're taking the microphone back, I just want to follow up on what Hans just said, and that is, this is exactly why this process is in place. It's because now that we've gotten great data on this and we know exactly what resources are needed to accomplish the goal, as the city grows out, they'll be able to identify shortfalls, and they'll be able to say, in order to maintain this goal, we might need some resources. I was teasing you about the resources before, but really, this is about resource allocation. If the city had another $100,000 to spend next year, the question is, do we need some money to achieve this goal or to maintain this goal, or do we need to assign it to another performance measure so that we can attain that one, so that the city council can weigh the pros and cons of each? And I think this kind of data collection, and the fire department's done a great job of putting this together so that it's very clear, is exactly what the city council needs to figure out how to allocate resources during the budget process. So, great question.
Chad.
Two clarifications. On the early slides, you had a high, a low, and a medium risk, and that wasn't the entire population of issues. So I wonder what else was out there besides high, medium, low. And then on the schools, has there even been a discussion if they expect you to go inspect them, are they going to allow us to approve the building as well, or we just get to clean up afterwards?
Let me start with your second question first. We're just looking at what's happening around us. We're just trying to be aware of things locally and nationally that are happening. And we don't think anything's going to change within this next fiscal year when it comes to the State Fire Marshal's office and requiring us or asking us strongly to take over those inspections. We would have that discussion with them, I believe, though. I think if we were to do those inspections, I think it would be very fair then to go back and ask us if they're going to do tenant improvements, that we should be on the plan side. We should be all the way back into that process. That would be my belief. That would be I think the position we would take. But that's going to take a while to figure out if the fire marshal is going to change anything in this next year. And then your first question, I'm sorry, can you just rephrase that one for me? I already forgot.
The risks is, as high, medium, and low, but that was only 30% of the total. So what other category is out there that doesn't fall into high, medium, and low?
That's all we do when it comes to for inspection purposes. Just looking under the microscope, just for the fire life safety code enforcement type of things, we only are looking at we add a fourth one too, critical infrastructure, but really we're looking at those three things just when it comes to the inspection. So it's high, moderate, low, and then critical infrastructure. So David, is that good? Anything you want to add to that, or? Okay.
Other questions? Great.
I just want to say excellent job in justifying the future inspectors. I think that was a great justification. No, I do want to say one thing.
Stay behind the mic.
Because I have to stay behind a mic? Really? We do have people from the city here who've been friends of Hans for a very long time, and I think most of you know that Hans will be retiring tomorrow. And today, when he presented to me that he would be doing the Accelerates on August 2nd, you can imagine my first question was, who's presenting? Because you're retiring August 3rd. It's not me, is it? But he has embraced this performance measure. Not only has he played a vital role in working with you all to create it, but he's taken this subject matter very serious. Community risk reduction and his team are committed and dedicated, and it's really he acknowledged the workforce, which we all appreciate. It's been his leadership, and we still have more things to say tomorrow. But I know some indicated they wouldn't be there. In front of you, I just wanted to say thank you for your support of us and support of Hans in this position, and 32 plus years of dedication. Will be walking out the door tomorrow, and he'll be entering into the next chapter. So thank you very much, and I know I'll get another opportunity tomorrow.
Very nice.
Can't wait for those new inspectors.
That wasn't good. Sorry, excuse me.
So staying with our theme of safe and secure communities, we have another performance measure, and that is related to pavement quality. So if you gentlemen come up and introduce yourselves and give us this.
Well, good afternoon. I'm not lucky enough or fortunate enough to retire like someone is, so I'm here for another 6 years. Lucky for you guys. So good afternoon, Isaac Chavera, Transportation Maintenance Manager.
And I'm Ed Bond, Senior Civil Engineer with Transportation Maintenance.
And this afternoon, we're going to talk to you about Pavement Quality Index. Hopefully for a lot of you, it's probably not anything new. Thank you to Rosa and her team that has been using PQI as an example, as a leader in terms of making sure that the performance metrics are being successful. And it's been a lot of work. In some cases, it's like I need it yesterday, but that's okay. That's what we're here for, to make sure that we get the word out there and that our performance metrics are heard. So today, again, it's Pavement Quality Index, City Council Strategic Priority 1.22. Our performance measure is to achieve adopted standards for pavement quality index equal to a citywide average rating of 70 or higher. So we ask ourselves, as with any other performance measure, why is this important? Well, in our world, especially in the public works world, asset management is the key to success in any type of asset management program. It's one of the largest, pavement quality pavement is one of our largest assets, if not the largest asset. And therefore, we want to make sure that we have processes in place, life cycle management processes in place to make sure that we're taking care of those assets. Life cycle management is proactively planning and budgeting for maintenance and replacement of these assets. Transportation asset management is a strategic approach to managing our pavement network by making sure that that there are standards for useful life, that there are solid preventative maintenance cycles in place, and we have performance metrics that are achieving our goals. In addition to that, there are links between CIPs, capital improvement projects, and long-term financial forecasts to get us to where we want to be. Another reason why it matters is Tempe roadways, as many of you live in the city of Tempe. It's difficult from time to time to get from point A to point B in a street that is full of potholes or cracks. And so it's important for our community development folks to be able to sell our city, to be able to make sure that our city looks good at all times with our roadway systems. For our residents, our visitors, it's important for them as well to make sure that they're on nice, clean roads. For our fire group, they want to make sure that they can get from point A to point B in an efficient manner rather than trying to, miss the potholes. It's also important to make sure that the roadways, as the third bullet shows, is we want roads that are free of potholes, free of cracks, and that contribute to a nice, comfortable ride. There are also additional reasons why it matters. I talked about emergency vehicles, less wear and tear on vehicles with good roads. Road noise, a lot of you may live adjacent to an arterial roadway where we've installed rubberized asphalt, a lot quieter versus conventional asphalt that's very noisy. Vehicle safety is improved, of course, and most importantly, the high PQI, Pavement Quality Index, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means, equals to lower cost in maintenance initially versus later on it's more expensive, which equates to reduced future budget requests. Ken, did you hear that one?
So here at City of Tempe, we measure the quality and condition of our roadways using Pavement Quality Index, which is a function of two different things. The first being the Surface Distress Index, or SDI, and Ride Comfort Index, which is RCI. So the PQI scale is ranging from 0 to 100, with 100 being the best. Our performance data is collected on a 3-year cycle, with year 1 being the northern half of the city, year 2 being the southern half, and year 3 being our arterials. This performance data is measured based off of a standardized standard that is pretty common within the pavement industry, which is called ASTM D6433-11. And this standard pretty much establishes the satisfactory range of pavement between 60 and 80. This standard also outlines how to measure and quantify surface distresses, such as cracks, potholes, rutting, and shoving. Our current PQI for 2018 is rated at a 59. 5 years ago, it was rated at 55.
So as with the earlier presentation, they talked about data gathering. Well, we've also been gathering data since the late 80s, early 90s. And those are key. That's key to making sure that we're making data-driven decisions, as Ed mentioned. This next slide here shows basically our entire network based on PQI. The green, for example, light green, dark green areas are the areas that are in good to very good condition versus the areas that are in yellow, orange, or red are areas that are in the lower PQI areas that obviously need some attention. And so this kind of gives you an overall network system and a good visual in terms of what the PQIs are doing. So now that we've talked about data and we've put together what 0 to 100 means and what PQI is, this is kind of a visual of basically putting a picture to a number, basically. Rio Salado Parkway on the left-hand side is a 70 PQI. The middle is Hardy Drive. The right-hand side is Guadalupe, which are greater than 70 PQI. Those two areas, excuse me, those two areas on the right-hand side have just been milled and overlaid. So you have that new rubberized texture on that roadway system, giving us a higher PQI.
These photos here also represent different levels of PQI. The bottom two and the top right represent what we would consider to be a poor score, and they range from 0 to 40. With a poor rated arterial or street, we typically see a lot of surface defects and get a poor ride quality from those. The top left shows a score of 59, which is our current network average, and that is rated as fair condition. So with fair condition streets, we typically see some surface defects, but overall we have a pretty decent, what we call fair ride quality. So this chart here shows our current performance data. So what we like to do is take our current condition data and use our pavement management software to develop a multi-year plan, and also use that software to predict what the future PQI may be. So this chart shows the past, the current, and what the future may hold with the current budget. So this year, fiscal year 2018-19, we have a budget of $5.3 million available, and our current PQI is 59. With slight increases of around 10% for the next 5 years, we are expected to have the PQI score remain at around a 59 to 60. And from starting in year 6, we're expected to see 1 to 2 point increases based on the current budget. So the amount of PQI score increase that we typically see each year greatly depends on the amount of budget available, the pavement treatment type that is available and their associated costs, the expected deterioration rates for each functional classification of streets. So the 3 types of functional classifications for our streets are arterials, residential, and collectors. So our next chart here shows what the future may hold under an accelerated budget scenario. Again, in the fiscal year 18-19, with a budget of around 5.3 million, we're at 59 score. And with the influx of funds in fiscal year 19-20 and a steady increase over a 5-year period, the PQI is predicted to increase to a 70 at the end of the 5-year budget. So this accelerated budget is about a 15% increase in a 5-year period over our current budget. And we could possibly, so this 15% increase over our 5-year budget will not only allow us to get to a 70 PQI score in half the time, but it will also increase the PQI score overall. So at the end of year 5, the amount of budget that will be requested will reduce down to $5 million per year, beginning in year 6, and then remain at that level, but we will also be able to continue to gain 1 point increases per year. So some of the strategies that we will utilize to continue to make sure that we meet our increases in PQI is continue to measure and collect pavement data. This is perhaps the most important part of our PQI piece because this current data allows us to make good data-driven decisions. The next piece is to continue to research new and updated pavement technologies such as micro and slurry seals, seal coats, thin overlays, and crack filling. The next piece is to continue to coordinate with our internal and external utility groups so that our ride quality on our streets remain in a good condition. And also to be able to continue to invest in pavement preservation and focus on these pavement management strategies so that our good streets remain good and they also remain good for a longer period of time.
So now for a 30-second crash course on pavement deterioration curve. I hope I don't put you guys to sleep, but basically I want to talk briefly about the pavement deterioration curve, which is that black line that you're looking at, versus cost per lane mile. So the 2 things to think about and to look at here is that pavement deterioration curve and the cost per lane mile. So as with any asset in the city, the pavement deterioration curve works similar in terms of its life cycle costs. So if you look at the black line at the very beginning stages at excellent, so for example, the Guadalupe that I showed earlier, we just milled and overlaid it, right? So the PQI is about 80, 89, 90s. Now, the idea behind extending the life cycle on that pavement is to make sure that we introduce early on preventative maintenance programs as well as maintenance and overlays at a cost of about $20,000 to $50,000 per lane mile. If we don't do that, then what we're doing later on is we're spending triple that, if not quadruple that, in some cases 10 times that, to be able to try to rehab it or reconstruct it at $160,000 or $330,000 at a later date. It's no different than your cars. It's no different than any asset. You change the tires on your vehicle, you change the battery, you change the oil, right? Why? Because we want to make sure that that vehicle is with us for the long term. Pavement's no different. We want to make sure that we invest early and we invest wise, meaning spending $20,000 for us is a lot better than spending $330,000 later. But with that, of course, comes some challenges. some of those challenges I'll talk about is the first bullet there is highway user revenue funds. The HERF fund, as some of you may or may not know, is made up of a variety of Arizona taxes and fees. That's what basically funds some of the capital investment programs, and it funds also our operating. This fund is made up of gas tax, fuel tax, registration, and so the state basically manages those funds, keeps some of those funds for the state, of course, for their asset management programs, but at the same time distributes the rest to cities, counties, et cetera. That formula is basically outdated, and it's based on population and fuel taxes. So as most of us know, the city of Tempe is moving towards and is doing a very good job in moving towards it being a sustainable city. Well, what does that mean? It means a city that relies on transit, that relies on mobility, bicycles, streetcar, those kinds of things, which is basically contradicting what we're trying to do or what the HERF was initially there for, right? Back in the day, there was more cars on the road, and those taxes were basically feeding that HERF fund. Well, now the idea is to be able to get vehicles off the street and either bike, bus, or use any alternative transportation. That's hurting the HERF fund. The other challenges that we run into, and I think it was talked about earlier in the presentation, is I heard the high increase in high occupancy. Well, what does that mean? How does that affect us in the pavement world? Well, the idea there is basically there's more vehicles on the road and there's more density, right, in the downtown. So there's more vehicles, more pavement infrastructure being disturbed, and also increased traffic, of course, in the downtown and even in southern areas of Tempe. The other challenge we run into, of course, and Ed touched a little bit on it, is the capital investment versus the operating. So we've been averaging about $5 to $6 million per capital improvement investment. Well, if we increase that to, let's just say 12, 13, 14 million, now we need to make sure that our operating expenditures equate to or keep up with those investments. We don't want to infuse the system with $14 million and not have sufficient money to make sure that we're maintaining it. So those operating monies have to also keep up. Lastly is and Ed also talked about this, is managing and minimizing the pavement cuts. If you can, it's kind of hard to see, but on that map, you could see the colored areas. Those are areas that are pavement projects, water, sewer projects, and also some of those dots throughout the city are basically permits that have been issued to the utility companies. So making sure that we're coordinating with the utility companies is key. Otherwise, here we are paving, and if we're not coordinating or doing a good job, the utility company is right behind us tearing up our infrastructure. So that is key to the success, and that is a huge challenge that we have to manage. With that, that concludes our presentation. There is an open data website that I'd like to show, and I believe Stephanie's going to help us out with that. And then we'll turn it over to you guys for questions.
Well, while Stephanie's calling that up, I just want to say this is a great presentation, and you guys hit all the high points, and you probably have some good questions. But just as an introduction to what Stephanie's going to bring up, there's been a great working relationship between the Strategic Management and Diversity Office and our GIS folks headed up by Stephanie over in IT. And what they've done is make this data available to the public. So if a member of the public looked at that map that Isaac showed you earlier and says, well, I can see what the conditions are in general, but I want to see my street, they can actually drill down, right, Stephanie? And they can say, what is the condition of the street in front of my house or the neighboring street, and when might it be scheduled for repair? So how's that for a lead-in?
Perfect. I think you just basically.
No, I was pretty much done with the presentation. Ken, you did a fantastic job. You should have been right here at the table with us. But no, that's exactly what it is. It basically gives our residents the opportunity to dial into their front doorstep and say, what does my PQI look like, in front of my street? In addition to that, kind of gives a little bit of information in terms of what does it cost to resurface the street, and puts a perspective in terms of what it takes to resurface about $1 million a mile.
So we're not only making data-driven decisions, we're using that data to provide to the public so that they have information. And we know that we have really educated people out in our public, and they might contact us and say, I have a suggestion for you, how you might improve this or how you might accelerate this further. So these aren't the only opportunities for residents to speak up. They can look online, and in the future, I would expect people to comment on this. So with that, I'm sure you have a lot of questions for these gentlemen. Hard questions.
Thanks for the presentation. So out of curiosity, you said that if you were to accelerate the program by 15%, you would achieve the 70 PQI in 5 years, did you say?
5 years. And that 15% increase is compared to the 5-year period under the current budget. So.
Okay. So how does that translate to additional streets being torn up or worked on? I mean, I would imagine that your criteria considers you can only have so many streets torn up in 40 square miles at once. Does that, number one, do you consider that as part of your criteria? And number two, how many miles does that translate to the extra 15%? Do you know?
I'll take it. So I talked earlier about the challenges that we have, and the map basically answers the question about, well, you have so much going on in terms of impact to our residents. That is very true, and the ability for us to manage that is important. One of the strategies that we, to your point, that we didn't talk about is there's 3 different network systems that we have, and Ed basically talked about the arterials, collectors, and residentials. The ability for us to get to 70 PQI sooner than later is to be able to focus in on those areas that I showed in yellow, orange, red, that are, for the most part primarily residential. So that would be a less impact for commuters to be in residential areas. Of course, it's a greater impact for the residents, but it's not high usage, high traveled areas if we did arterials. Not to mention that our arterials, and correct me Ed if I'm wrong, arterials are at about a 70 PQI already. So the ability for us to be able to maintain those roads in good condition is the key, but at the same time focus our efforts in the residential areas. Did I miss anything, Ed?
Yep, that's essentially it.
You're the expert.
We just essentially have to focus those budget dollars on the right type of street. And then not only that, make sure that the pavement treatment type that we apply towards that street is going to give us an acceptable life cycle out of that street based off the cost.
And in the pavement management world, it's right place, right time, right product. So if we could do that, we'll get to that 70 PQI sooner than later.
So just one more question. The rubberized sealant, I'm going to assume that it's more expensive?
Slightly, yeah, slightly more expensive. But it does last a little bit longer, and it doesn't wear as quickly, it doesn't deteriorate as quickly as a conventional pavement would. So, typically we see that it flexes more because, of course, rubber is flexible, and then the conventional doesn't have that flexibility, so it starts to crack a little bit earlier.
Lighter too, right?
Oh, yes. Yep.
Comments or questions or suggestions for how they might, this is a great performance measure, isn't it? All those things that you knew all these years, you just needed data to prove it to everybody that you actually, the investment in roads that you make early in the life cycle of the road more than pays for itself, because you'll spend twice as much, or like you said, up to 10 times as much later if you let it go. So this is exactly what we're looking for, reasons to allocate resources to the proper need. Yep, yep. This and fire. Public Works and fire. Other questions? Well, let's thank these gentlemen for this great presentation. And thank you for joining us. And like I said, encourage members of the public to attend these or look at them online on Channel 11 and fill out, there's a There is a score sheet on the back of how you thought this presentation went and how we might improve that. Thanks again to Rosa and her strategic management and diversity team for coming up with this idea. I think it's a great idea. It's working well. And September 6th, we'll be back here for safety in the parks and safety in city facilities. So come back and join us then. Thank you.